Today, I'm going to show you an overview of my color grading process using a film emulation plugin called Dehancer to build some simple film looks. Dehancer is a tool that's been designed to help create a convincing film look with practically any footage. This is not a sponsored video. I have just been personally using it for the past few months. Towards the end of this video, I'll give you my thoughts on Dehancer, and I hope this helps you judge for yourself if Dehancer is right for you. I'll be using Vinci Resolve today, but this is also available on Adobe Premiere and Final Cut. Okay, let's get started. So I have 5 shots here. These 3 shots of this Tesla were shot on a red, and these 2 shots on the beach were shot on a Blackmagic Pocket 4K. Now I've already gone ahead and done all of my color management on this timeline. If you guys have never done color management in Resolve, I highly recommend looking up videos on YouTube about how to do this. Colin Kelly has a bunch of them that are really in-depth and very thorough. It's a very important step, and I'm going to briefly go over how I've done my node level color management here because it is connected to how I use Dehancer, but I'm not going to be going in depth to explain why you should be doing color management and the importance of it. So let's start with the Tesla shots. I have grouped these 3 Tesla shots together, and so when you group shots together, you see these dots up here at the top of your node tree in Resolve. The very first dot is the group pre-clip. So this is where you're going to put your first color space transform to get your footage into a normal working state. So I've gone from red wide gamut RGB to DaVinci wide gamut, which is my working color space. And then next to this on the clip level, I have 4 nodes: primary, contrast, color balance, and saturation. We'll come back to these in a second. And then in the group post clip, this is your end of pipeline color space transform. I have this going from DaVinci wide gamut, which is again our working color space, into Rec 709 Gamma 2.4, which is what my monitor is set to. Now, in this group post clip, this is the important step. In this group post clip, this is where I add an additional node. And typically this is where I put Dehancer. So I'll throw Dehancer on. The reason I put Dehancer here is this way I don't have to just copy a grade onto every single shot. Everything that I do within Dehancer is going to apply correctly and in a nuanced way to every clip within my group. And so typically, if I'm doing a project, I'm grouping, if it's all shot on one camera, I'm grouping all of those shots together, doing my node level color management like this, and then throwing something like Dehancer on if I'm doing a general look with Dehancer as my foundation. So now that we have Dehancer on here, we just want to make sure our source input is correct. So our source input in this case is Rec 709 because this is being applied after my Rec 709 color space transform. You can experiment with putting the Dehancer node before your color space transform because I think that's typically what a lot of people would instinctually do. But I have found in my testing that if you're using Dehancer in a color managed pipeline like this, I like it on the Rec 709 end. I actually find that if you, for example, if I deleted this, added a node beforehand, put Dehancer on, and then change this to DaVinci wide gamut intermediate, I find I like the colors and what Dehancer is doing less overall than if I just put it afterwards after the Rec 709 transform. So that's what we're going to do today. And immediately when you put Dehancer on, you're going to notice your image change quite significantly without you doing anything because there's a lot of film grain here and there's a lot of kind of desaturated, slightly lower contrast effects to the footage, and that's because it's already auto applying a default film stock of Kodak Vision 3 250D. So there's a couple of things I do with Dehancer before I actually start getting too in depth. I go down to film grain. Oh, I passed it. Okay, so go to film grain. I'm going to turn my film grain off. This way I can just see kind of the texture and the colors of the image without being distracted by the way that the film grain looks. I'll add the film grain later. A secondary benefit of turning your film grain off at this stage is you'll get slightly better performance in playback. So now that I've got my film grain off, I'm actually going to go up to my film stock and choose which film stock I'm going to use. Dehancer has a lot of film stocks available, so we're going to look at 2 different ones today. For this first shot though, I'm actually going to keep it on the default of Vision 3 250D. After I've settled on whether or not I'm going to use a film stock and pick the right one, I'm going to go down to the print setting and switch my profile to Kodak 2383. And what you'll notice right off the bat with that is that the contrast of our shot changes rather significantly. So this is on and this is off. Sometimes you might find that when you turn on the print film emulation that it's actually almost too contrasty. I think in the case of this shot, it's not too bad. But if you do find it to be a little bit too contrasty, you can roll off the highlights and shadows and clamp them down by using the analog range limiter, which I think I am going to do here, even though it's not too bad in terms of contrast. And then from there, I will generally come back to film grain, halation, and bloom in terms of the settings on Dehancer. But after I've set my film and my print film emulation, I don't really touch the controls within Dehancer because I'll do all of my custom grading either before these two nodes here in the group post clip if I'm building a look, or I'll start making clip level adjustments. And so in this case today, we're going to go back to the clip level adjustments and we're going to start working from here. So now that we're at the clip level adjustments, one thing that I actually like to do when I'm using Dehancer, especially a cinema stock like Kodak Vision 250D, I find that the images can be a little bit desaturated and flat because of Dehancer's film emulation just by default. So what I like to do is I'll go to my saturation and just for you guys' reference, how I've set up this saturation node is not just to use the saturation slider at the bottom. You can do this, but I actually don't find it to be the best way of controlling your saturation. My preferred way of controlling saturation is actually to take in our saturation node, go to color space, select HSV, which is hue, saturation, and value. Go to your channels, turn off channel 1, turn off channel 3, which means you're turning off your hue channel and you're turning off your value channel, leaving yourself with just saturation. And then I can use my primaries, so I can use my gamma, for example, and just work my saturation back up. And then I can even take my gain and either work my saturation and my gain up, or I could work it down. I think in this instance, I'm going to work it up as well slightly. And the reason I do this is that way I can bring some life and color back into the shot, which gives me a better sense of where I want the exposure and the contrast to sit when I actually start working on it. This is not a required step, obviously, and a lot of people don't do saturation at the very beginning, but I prefer to in my workflow. So I'm going to move over to my primaries and let's just play with the offset. Now, this is a very dark kind of blue hour nighttime shot, so I don't want to overdo that. I want to kind of live in this kind of moodier world. So I'm going to just play around with the offset and see where I want things to sit. I might actually even bring our exposure down a little bit. Yeah, that's kind of feeling cool. And then I'm going to just play with our gamma and lift ever so slightly. That's looking pretty good. Slight adjustments. And then you know what? I'm going to go over to our contrast node and I'm just going to throw a curve on here. Don't want to go too far. I'm going to bring this down actually. So really clamp down on our highlights. Don't want to lose any detail, but I'm going to a little bit of a curve in the shadows. Okay, so let's see what we're doing. Let's see primary and contrast. Okay, I'm happy with that. I'm actually going to go over to the primaries, I think, and bring my gain down even a little bit more. Bring up our gamma bring up gamma slightly, and then let's see. How much more can I bring my lift down without losing detail? Okay, that's feeling pretty good. Okay, so now that I'm happy with the exposure and contrast nodes for now, I'm going to move over to our color balance. And I'm going to go to the hue versus sat curve. I'm going to sample this car. And I'm just going to, because it's a white car, I don't want it to be completely blue. So I'm going to very, very subtly lower our hue versus sat in the car. Yeah, so it's very slight, but I actually like that slight adjustment. Okay, so with that slight hue versus sat curve adjustment, I'm actually happy with living in a blue hour world for this shot. I'm liking how the color is coming across. So I'm not going to do anything else in the color balance node. But what I do want to experiment with is trying to get a little bit more density out of the blue hues that are in the road and kind of the things that are surrounding the car. And because I want this to properly affect all of the shots in this group, which should be going together, I'm going to move over to the group post clip, and I'm going to put a node before our CST in the group post clip. So before the Rec 709. So move this over, and then I'm going to add a layer mixer. And with the layer mixer, I'm going to go to composite mode. I'm going to change it to color. So then on the top node here, I'm going to go to the RGB mixer. I'm going to switch it to monochromatic. And now I can affect the blue channel and just play around with bringing it down. Yeah, I like that. If you can see it in the road, so this is what it looks like. This is what we're doing, and this is what it looks like before. So before, after. Before, after. So this RGB mixer with the layer mixer node combination is just making our blues a little bit more dense overall. And I'm really liking how that's making things feel. And with that, actually, I think I might just go back over to our contrast, and I'll just ever so slightly tweak this curve a bit more. Doesn't have to be much. And then I'm going to go back over to the primaries and I'll adjust our gamma one more notch up. Okay, so now that I'm happy with our clip level adjustments, there's actually one more thing I'd like to do. So I'm going to go back over to the group post clip, go to Dehancer, scroll back down, and we're going to add in our film grain. And I think we'll also add in our halation and our bloom as well. So with the film grain, I'm going to set it to a pretty mild film grain of ISO 50. And I'm actually even going to lower the 50 down to about 15 on terms of the amount, because I don't want it to be too crazy. A lot of times too with car shots like this, you're not necessarily going to be adding film grain, halation, and bloom, but to experiment with Dehancer, we are going to do this today. This is with the bloom on and off. So it's pretty subtle, but you can really see it in the headlights and kind of these watermarks here. I'm liking that. And then the halation. Yeah, so the halation kind of adds that like slight orangey red tinge to the lights here. If we actually just try to play this back, might be a little bit sluggish. You can really see it in the middle point of the headlights. Okay, so this is where we started. This is what we ended up with. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with this look. I'm actually gonna, on the clip level, grab a still. And then I'm going to apply our still to this shot, this secondary shot, see how it looks. And I'm also going to apply it to this slightly darker first shot. So this one we're going to need to adjust. But you'll also notice, because I did that layer mixer adjustment here in the group post clip, all three of these clips were adjusted the exact same way, and they all have the same level of density in the blue. So these are the kind of things where if you're building a look with Dehancer, and you know that you want kind of a certain level of a certain color, definitely put it in a group post clip like this, where you're kind of doing your look building. And then that way you know that it's properly applied to every single shot and affecting it in a subtle way. So back to the clip level adjustment of this first shot, it's quite underexposed. So I'm going to bring back our primaries on this shot and just work my offset with my number pad. Bring that back up a ton. I'm going to actually find a hero frame with this shot right about here. Okay, so that's good. You can really see what the halation and the bloom are doing on this shot in terms of the headlights. And you can also see it in the reflections here. So I think this shot's feeling a little bit crunchy. I'm going to reset our lift, and I'm actually going to bring up the gamma. Okay, yeah, so I'm pretty happy with where we're sitting in terms of the primaries. I'm going to move on to the contrast node here, and I think I'm going to actually just back off the shadow contrast. Maybe even lift it ever so slightly. Okay, so considering this shot was quite underexposed compared to our other two shots, just because the light was pretty much gone at this point, let's see where we came from. This is before, that's after. Wow, that's a pretty big difference. I'm gonna go to our hero frame. Here's our before, that's our after. So just to recap with these first three shots, you can really see how much heavy lifting Dehancer is doing to get this look, because when you look at the clip level adjustments that we did, we just worked our primaries and our offset a little bit, added a contrast curve, did a very slight hue versus sat adjustment in our color balance node, added some saturation with the HSV color space, and then added a layer mixer node group that gave us our final look. But like, let's see look at how much Dehancer is doing. This is without Dehancer, and this is with. Okay, so let's move on to the second shot. I have grouped these similarly to our last shots. So the group pre-clip is a CST going from Blackmagic to DaVinci Wide Gamut, which is again our working color space. And then the group post-clip, I have the same CST of DaVinci Wide Gamut to Rec 709. And then we're going to add Dehancer just after the Rec 709 transform. Make sure our source is set to Rec 709. Scrolling down, turning off our film grain. Going to turn on our print to Kodak 2383. This one's pretty contrasty, but I'm not going to use Vision 3 250D for this shot. I'm actually going to go to use a photography stock, and I'm going to do AFCA Chrome RSX 2200. So I like this as a starting point. It's a little bit, again, desaturated. So I'm going to start working on this at the clip level. Go over to our saturation node, make sure it's in the correct color space, HSV, channel 1 off, channel 3 off. Go over to our primaries. For gamma, I'm going to just work this up. Don't want to go too far. Let's sit there. Might go a little in the highlights. Okay, so that's a little bit too saturated, but we'll work on that as the shot progresses. So I'm going to go over to our primaries. I'm going to bring up our offset with my numpad a little bit. And going to lower our lift slightly. Lift up our gamma. Just lower our gain slightly. And then I'm going to play around with our contrast slider here. I just lower my pivot. Let's see, where do we want to sit? It's not bad. So let's just see where we are for primaries. Before, after, before, after. Okay, that's feeling like a little bit better. I'm going to go over to our contrast. I'm going to just add a very subtle curve here. Very subtle. I'm actually maybe going to go back over to our contrast here and just lower this slightly. And I might reset our lift because it might have gone too far on the lift. Okay. Her skin's feeling a little bit too warm, and I kind of want to live in a slightly cooler tone overall with this shot because of the blues that we see. So I'm going to go over to a color balance. Hue versus sat. I'm going to select yellow. And I'm just going to bring our yellow down ever so slightly. Yeah, that's really subtle. I don't even know if you guys can see that, but I am noticing it to be slightly more natural looking. Might just go a little further. Yeah, okay, cool. That's good. And then with the color balance as well, I'm going to take out some of the yellow in the image overall. Bring it a little bit more towards magenta, red. Oh yeah, that's a lot better. You see, so this is before, after, before, after. So it took out a lot of the yellow and green out of her skin, and this feels a lot nicer. There's still some nice contrast between her skin and the background areas. I might just add a little bit more contrast to this curve. So I'm going to go back to our contrast curve and bring this up ever so slightly more. Yeah, cool. And so let's see where we came from. So this is with all our clip level adjustments. Before, after, before, after. Cool. No major adjustments here. I'm going to grab a still. And I'm going to go over to our second shot. Just apply the same grade. Middle click my mouse wheel. You can also just right click and hit apply grade. So that's good. And I think this shot's quite a bit darker. So I'm going to find our hero frame here. Yep. Go over to our primaries. And I'm actually going to just reset the lift. Bring our offset up a bunch. Not too far. And going to bring the gain down a little bit more. That feels okay. I'm going to go up on gamma slightly. And okay, and let's just do a global. This is before any sort of clip level adjustment. After. That's feeling pretty good. I actually dig how the blue hour look here. Let me just double check our saturation. Is it too much? Might be a little oversaturated in the gamma, so I'm going to bring our gamma down slightly. Yeah, that feels a little nicer. A little more subtle. Again, so for our first shot on the beach, before, after, before, after. And then our second shot, before, after. You know what? As I look at these, I actually want to get a little bit more density out of these mountains. So I'm going to go over to our group post clip. I'm going to select the node, the CST. I'm going to put a node beforehand. So same thing I did with the other shot. I'm going to add a layer mixer. Select our composite mode to color. Go over to the RGB mixer. Select monochromatic. And let's just see if I can get a little bit more out of the blue. So I'm going to take our blue channel. I'm just going to lower it a little bit. So yeah, you guys can see lowered it by 0.79, minus 0.79. And you can really see how much of a difference that's making in the mountains. Nice. Okay, let me just make sure that didn't do anything I didn't like on the skin. Might be pushing it a little bit far, so I might not go that far with the blue. Yeah, that's feeling better. Okay, so I'm liking where both of our clips are sitting now. The last thing I'm going to do with these two shots is I'm going to go back to the group post clip. I'm going to go to Dehancer, and I'm just going to scroll down, turn on our grain, turn on halation, turn on bloom. I'm going to leave them probably at the defaults. I'm going to bring this to 35 millimeter ISO 250, but I'm going to lower this to like 15. And let's just see what this looks like. So this first shot here. Nice. You can really see the bloom very gently going across the top of her head. And you can see the halation in the ocean with the grain in combination really gives that film aesthetic. So with Dehancer, I think we're able to build two pretty simple but good looking film looks with these groups of shots. There are a couple things that I would personally like improved about Dehancer. So one thing that I would like improved is when you actually look at the Dehancer in its effects panel here, And you scroll through all the options like the film damage, film breathe, gate weave, overscan, which is kind of a cool feature. You can enable a film strip look on your footage. These options are all great, and they're all elements that real film can emulate. So I understand why they've added them in, but I actually find that I don't turn to them very often. And so by default, with kind of when you put Dehancer on, all of these tabs are open, which can kind of feel overwhelming. It's like, okay, what do I use? What do I not use? It'd be nicer if the UI was better designed, where it was a little bit clearer and less cluttered looking. The other thing is, I wish there was a way in the film tab in particular for it to be easier to scroll through all the different kinds of film options. Because yes, I found 2 film stocks that I really liked, but it was after like a lot of trial and error, and I was just kind of picking which ones. I mean, at the end of the day, if you're shooting footage knowing that you're also going to grade it, you could kind of pick your film stock beforehand and then go down here and export a LUT to monitor on your camera. But that's, that extra step. Not everyone will do that. But besides those 2 minor UI gripes, I actually think Dehancer is a great film emulation plugin. So if you're hoping to get a film look with your footage in a fairly easy way and approachable way, I think it's a pretty good option. And Dehancer has a couple different versions. So if you don't need all these extra features like the gate weave and the halation and the bloom, you can buy an edition of Dehancer that fits your needs. This video was not sponsored by Dehancer, but they did provide a discount code for any of you guys that are interested in picking it up. I will also put a link as well as my code in the description. I am also excited to be launching my first newsletter where I share content that does not fit well in a YouTube video format. So feel free to sign up if you've been enjoying my channel so far. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you spending time with me today.